The ancient Egyptians. They built great pyramids, temples, and tombs in life in a bid to become immortal after death. Along with magnificent monuments, this civilization is best known for giving the world the Egyptian mummy. Wonders of preservation. These mummies have left us a truly astonishing legacy. In fact, the ancient Egyptians became so good at mummification that even 4,000 years after their death, we've got incredible clues to their lives and the secrets of the past. I'm on the trail of 10 of the most remarkable, greatest mummies. Wow, it's hot. It gets really hot. From all-powerful pharaoh kings to my all-time heroine of history. Oh, I wish she could talk. And the revelations of everyday ancient Egyptians. That is pretty cool that she's the oldest tattooed woman. Using the latest cutting-edge technology, for the first time, I'll witness what lies under the mummy's wraps. That's so impressive. We're beginning to see the man inside. Remembering that these mummies are real people who we need to care about, respect, and cherish. A baby, look at that. I'm going to explore their extraordinary hidden stories. As I count down... This is absolutely petrifying. Our top 10 Egyptian mummies. The Valley of the Kings. Since tombs were discovered centuries ago, mummies have gripped our imagination. Why do we find them so fascinating? These incredible mummified remains tell us so much, not just about death, but about life. If you want to understand the ancient world, who better to ask than an ancient Egyptian? I've tracked down 10 of Egypt's mummies. Wow. Who all have a vital story to tell about history and their own lives. I'm blown away. To begin my countdown, at number 10, someone who died over 3,200 years ago and who lived as the most powerful man on Earth. The ancient Egyptians mummified their dead to give them eternal life, so they'd be remembered for all time. Certainly the case with one almighty pharaoh. This man, Ramses II, or Ramses the Great, still holds court in Cairo. Egyptologist Salima Ikram is helping me explore why he deserves to be called the Great. So here he is. One of the most powerful men that ever lived, arguably.
Oh, absolutely. He's magnificent, and he was an imposing creature in life because he's almost 6 feet tall, which was magnificently tall for an ancient Egyptian. And what's really cool about if you look at his nose, it's been stuffed. That's why it stands proud. So there's a little bone in it and lots of little seeds because everyone else's nose is sort of collapsed inwards.
Yeah.
But it was a prominent feature of Ramses II's physiognomy, and he was really proud of his honker.
And tell me what else, because we know so much about him from historical records, from, inscriptions. What does this mummy tell you about the man?
Well, poor thing, he lived till he was almost 90. He had horrible teeth. He must be suffering from abscesses and various other things. He had some arthritis. He had a bit of stooping going on. So he was not in very tip-top physical condition, but he did live longer than almost any other ancient Egyptian because most people were dead by the time they were 40.
Mummy comes from an ancient word for resin, mum, and resin's embalming effects are often quite remarkable.
If you look at his hair,
yes,
it's blondish. And so people have said, oh my God, was he a redhead? Was he a blonde person? But in actual fact, it's natron, which is the thing that was used to mummify him, which is a mixture of baking powder and salt, which is natural desiccant. But it colors the hair, and so that has reached the color of his hair. Plus, he was already going white.
Yeah. But he still, even if he wasn't a natural blonde, He's probably 90. He's got a pretty good head of hair left, bald at the top, but, you know, that's quite a lot, isn't it? There's one thing about him, though, isn't there, that we know that he sired at least 100 children.
At least.
At least. But I'm right in saying, aren't I, that he's lost his genitals, doesn't he?
It's very peculiar. He does not seem to have them, ironically, but they probably just fell off. And that does happen because they're dangly bits that are dry and hard, don't always survive. Extremities fall off.
Right. Stiff and yet vulnerable, even in death.
Even in death, as in life.
Yes. Across Egypt, you'll find temples, monuments and statues bearing the name and face of Ramses the Great. He almost certainly built more than any other pharaoh. This is the Ramesseum. And what this is actually a mortuary temple. So it's where Ramses the Great's body was mummified before it was taken to his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. In this Valley of Death, Ramses ensured his achievements in life were celebrated. Ramses II came from a great soldiering family, and he commemorated his campaigns on these walls. And here he is, victorious on his chariot. Mummies were one way of securing immortality, majestic monuments another. And just across the Nile, I want to show you one of Ramses' most fabulous projects. This is the Great Temple at Karnak, and you'd have made your way in through these massive pylons, which are kind of monumental gateways, and actually give us our word pylon today. They're a fittingly grandiose front door for what's the largest ancient religious site in the world, where the most impressive architecture was commissioned by Ramses the Great. And to really appreciate this, I'm heading up for the best view. Coming up, I'm given exclusive access to Ramses' great temple. It's a little bit slippery. And learn the secrets of one of the world's most beautiful mummies. I'm at Karnak Temple, stamping ground of Ramses the Great, one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, where I've got special access inside the monument. Whenever I come to an archaeological dig in Egypt, then nearly always the men who are there doing the skilled and specialist work are from just one village called Kuft, which is very close to here. So Kuftis have become the kind of unofficial guardians of all Egyptian heritage, and there's one here in the temple who I'm not met him before. Hello, are you Mr. Farouk?
Good to see you.
Oh, how lovely to meet you. I'm
Good.
great.
Good.
I'm great, thank you. This is Mr. Farouk, who's. I think you're going to let me up into
I'll
the
let
pylon.
you go up. I help you to go the top to the higher.
Amazing.
Let's go now.
Amazing. So no one's normally allowed up here, but Mr. Farouk has the key.
I have the key, of course.
Just like his father and grandfather before him, Mahmoud Farouk is one of the Kufti guardians who looks after Karnak's temples. Thanks.
The way.
Wow, this is so. This is the original passage up through the
That's for the worker.
through the wall. Yep, it's a little bit slippery. Oh, great! Is that daylight there? These are the original steps. It's fantastic. It's a huge honour for me to be allowed access to this incredible passageway, gouged out over 2,500 years ago.
Now you go to the way to the top.
I will. Oh my gosh.
You need a hand?
No, well, I've just spotted the. Oh my God, that's making me feel weird. That's
Please come
that's a
behind
sheer
me.
drop down there, only about 60 metres or so. This is amazing.
You know you are the first person from the Frandan Egyptian who come here from a long time.
I'm genuinely honoured. This is incredible. Mahmoud aims to come here every day, lovingly restoring and caring for this ancient temple with some of the same techniques used by Ramses the Great's workmen.
I'll be honest with you, I like here more than my house because I come here every day.
But I bet you don't tell your wife that you like the temple more than your house.
I don't tell her, but I feel between me and you, just as myself.
It's our secrets.
I don't need trouble with my wife.
I don't want you to have trouble with your wife either. It's our secret. Well, this is pretty cool. This is pretty
so nice
cool.
to see, like.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Shukran.
I'm so happy you are happy, really. It's good for me.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy indeed. It's beautiful, truly beautiful.
Standing up here, you really get a sense of the scale of Ramses' achievements and why he was revered as an all-powerful leader. And down there, I want to show you one of the reasons he's remembered as Ramses the Great today.
You know, I was talking about how Ramses was very involved in international campaigns and warfare. There's a fantastic bit of evidence for that here.
The writing on this wall doesn't just record history, it makes it.
Ramses' arch enemies were the Hittites, and the two powers had huge battles that had gone on and on for years, and eventually they decided to call it quits, and there's evidence of that here on this wall, which is arguably the world's first ever peace treaty.
Creating this, Ramses the Great secured his place in the history books. A copy of this peace treaty still hangs in the United Nations building in New York today. And even Ramses' mummy itself has made history.
So this is an incredible thing. Ramses II has a passport and travelled to France in the 70s.
Yes, about 77. He went off because he'd grown some kind of mould which couldn't be treated here.
Yeah.
And so he was issued with a passport, occupation, king, comma, deceased.
Amazing, yeah. Isn't that great? Sorry, but that is the best. There's the best occupation on a passport, isn't it? King deceased, and that must make him the oldest human in the world to have been issued with a passport.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He is the best travelled pharaoh, and perhaps, apart from Tutankhamun, one of the most famous.
Ramses the Great in the ancient world, and pretty great in the modern world.
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
This is one of our treasures because this pharaoh and his passport reminds us, and it's really, really critical to remember this, these are real people with real lives. And in the case of Ramses II, with remarkable lifetimes. He was a celebrity in his own day. He's become a celebrity now, and his life changed history itself.
Next, I explore the most extravagant funeral home in history, fit for the most beautiful mummy in the world. In Cairo, there's an extraordinary character who helps us understand tons about how the ancient Egyptians mummified their dead and why they went to all that trouble. He's number 9 in our countdown of Egyptian mummies.
Meet the man who has to be one of the most beautiful ancient Egyptians in existence, Seti I.
Seti I was the father of our friend Ramses the Great. Just like his son, he was a hugely successful pharaoh. But in father-son rivalry, there's one category where he wins hands down. His mummy. Because Seti I boasts some of the finest mummification work in all of ancient Egyptian history. Mummification is an incredible process of drying out and embalming the body to preserve it, ready for its journey to immortality in the afterlife. Key to it all was the preparation of the body. Typically, your brain is pulled out through your nostrils with an iron hook. Next, all of your major organs are removed, apart from the heart. Ancient Egyptians believed this was the centre of your being. These organs are then preserved in special jars so they can be reunited with their owner in the afterlife. Your body is then covered in a salt called natron and left to dry for up to 40 days. Finally, the now mummified body is wrapped head to foot in hundreds of meters of linen bandages attached with a glue, and magical spells are cast to protect the mummy and prepare it for safe arrival in the afterlife. But Seti's mummy is unusual. His face is incredibly well preserved. He looks almost perfect, not what you might expect from a body over 3,000 years old.
But frankly, Seti has had quite a lot of work done.
Unlocking the secrets behind Seti's youthful good looks is Professor of Radiology, Sahar Salem.
I always looked at his mummy and I said, this is no mummy. This is a sleeping beauty. And I've always wondered, what was his secret? The secrets revealed to me that the ancient Egyptians were very efficient as plastic surgeons.
So was it really plastic surgery?
Yeah, and they actually placed fillers around the nose and the mouth in this region, in the cheeks, and even in the temporal.
When a body's mummified, the face naturally shrivels and often the nose collapses. Definitely not the case here. Sahar knows from her painstaking research that all the stops have been pulled out and Seti I was given a facelift after death.
What does this tell you about their ideas of ancient beauty, for men as well as for women?
The ancient Egyptian would like to look like his god.
There is something very, very charismatic about him.
He was the most well mummified person from ancient Egypt that I've ever looked at.
I love the way you talk about him. I bet you wish you'd met him.
Definitely. We will meet one day.
In the afterlife?
Yes.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, good luck.
Egyptians beautified Seti's mummy to make sure it was in the best possible shape to travel to the afterlife. Once there, Seti would need a stunning home for all eternity. So I've come to the Valley of the Kings near Luxor. Hidden within this rocky landscape are the tombs of the most famous pharaohs in Egyptian history. Now, I want to show you Seti's because, quite frankly, it's pretty mind-blowing. And it also holds clues to the story of his mummy, which was nearly lost forever.
For over 1,000 years, ancient Egyptian pharaohs had built massive tombs to house their mummified remains in preparation for their journey to the afterlife. Now, they didn't just believe that they were living on as humans, but as almighty gods. So rival pharaohs would build ever more magnificent tombs to try to outdo their predecessors. Morning. Morning. Ah, shukran. Thank you. It's okay to come in here? Thank you. Shukran.
With over 170 metres of corridors and chambers, Seti's mummy's tomb is one of the longest and, to be honest, the most splendid in the whole valley.
Oh my goodness, I just love this place because it goes on and on and on. And every single surface is decorated. And each one of these pictures tell us what Seti I, and actually all of our mummies, believed happened to them in their journey to the afterlife.
The Egyptians believed that the afterlife was a real physical place, and that the dead pharaoh would live near these tombs as if they were royal palaces. Built to ensure a peaceful journey for the mummy to the afterlife. In fact, this is a massive target for tomb raiders.
Originally there was a beautiful sarcophagus here, but the rest of this incredible chamber was empty because all of its treasure and Seti's mummy itself had been robbed.
For over 3,000 years, the whereabouts of Seti's mummy remained a mystery. And as time passed, Seti's beautiful mummy was slowly forgotten. But then, in 1881, a discovery near the Valley of the Kings changed everything. Looking for treasure, a local tomb raider stumbled across a deep pit on a remote cliff face. What he found inside took his breath away. A secret cache of over 40 mummies, all carefully labelled. This mystery store was the work of ancient Egyptian high priests.
They noticed that robbers were raiding the tombs and that they were taking not just treasures, but actual bodies. Now, this really, really troubled him because for him, this wasn't just robbing, this was desecration.
The priests masterminded a high-risk mission to rescue the mummies of great pharaohs. So what you have here is a roll call of ancient Egyptian power. Ramses the Great, Ramses III, and the magnificent mummy of Seti I.
It's hard to get your head around the scale of this task. So they were stealing into each tomb, rescuing the mummy, bringing them here in secret, and then lowering them down into that shaft where they stayed undisturbed for 3,000 years.
Without the ancient high priest's foresight and the efforts of one very fortunate tomb raider, Seti's mummy could have vanished from history.
Seti I deserves to be on our list of Egypt's greatest mummies, partly because he is such a fine example of preservation, but also because he reminds us why mummification matters. It helps us to understand what mattered to them philosophically, because for men like Seti I, death wasn't the end, but the beginning of a better, brighter, more beautiful life.
Coming up, Egypt's best-kept secret. We discover a long-forgotten pharaoh hidden deep in the desert.
Bye. See you again, I hope.
Next in our countdown, it's mummy number 8, a mummy with a truly remarkable story. The hunt for this individual inspired a blockbuster Hollywood film, and his identity remained an unsolved mystery until 1939. I've come to investigate.
And here he is, the man who held on to his secrets for 3,000 years and who helped to inspire me to be a historian.
To unpack the tale of our mystery mummy number 8, I'm heading deep into the Nile Delta.
When I was a teenager, I went to see the film Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it had a huge influence on me. Basically, I wanted to be Indiana Jones, discovering lost tombs and treasures and cities and bouncing through the desert on the back of a pickup truck.
What I didn't realise then is that the film was based on a real sequence of events that happened where I'm heading now. Indiana Jones's lost city of Tanis. And just like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, our tale unfolds as the world is torn apart by the Second World War. So the Nazis had their part to play in keeping this mummy a secret. The story starts in 1929, when archaeologist Pierre Montet, our hero, comes here and starts digging. And he doesn't stop digging for 10 years.
The expedition was searching for the tombs and the lost city of Tanis, a kind of mystical place described in the Bible as Zoan.
Around the 11th century BCE, the pharaohs had built a new capital city and harbour in the north, which they called Tanis. But over time, the course of the Nile changed. The river silted up, and the city of Tanis, its tombs and mummies, were abandoned to the sands. Montet suspected that the ancient city was hidden somewhere in the area.
For 10 years, Montet and his team dug through 5 meters of sand and dirt until they struck archaeological gold.
In early 1939, Montet found an entrance to what he believed to be the long-lost royal tombs of the Tanis pharaohs. A forgotten place where few people come these days.
Hey, morning. Sabah, sabah.
Welcome.
Ah, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. You've got the key, do you?
Yes, yes.
Oh, great.
Tomb guardian Ezaj Arif has agreed to open up.
Okay.
Shukran, thank you. Bye. See you again, I hope. I'm very glad I got my boots on because you have to be careful of snakes down here apparently. So when they got down, this entrance was blocked by a limestone wall, but they managed to make their way through. Oh my God, this is absolutely petrifying, but I think it's going to be worth it.
Monte and his team dug until finally they broke through into a royal chamber. To their dismay, they found it had been cleared out by robbers. But instead of giving up, Monte kept digging. For 3 weeks, he cleared his way through walls and passageways until eventually he discovered a hidden chamber.
I think how exciting this would have been, because this was the first time that anybody had been down here for 3,000 years.
And what he came across stopped him in his tracks.
What they discovered here was the intact chamber of a pharaoh. Now, this is really, really rare because usually the tombs have been robbed. And not only that, but this room was packed with silver and gold and with hieroglyphs and decorations on every wall.
Monte had struck archaeological gold. It would prove to be as life-changing a haul as the famous discovery of Tutankhamun in 1922. Right in the centre of this room was a huge solid silver coffin. Now, silver was even more precious than gold in ancient Egypt. But who was the mysterious occupant who lay inside? When he opened the coffin, he saw a gold mask and breathtaking jewellery, fit for a king.
It's little surprise that Monte described this as a day of marvels. But what he didn't realise was that he'd stumbled upon a forgotten pharaoh, Shoshenq II.
The inscriptions inside the coffin revealed that he discovered a pharaoh that no one had ever heard of before. This unknown pharaoh is our mummy number 8, erased from history for nearly 3,000 years. But unlike the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, there was no international fanfare for the opening of Shoshenq's. At the very time Monte was unearthing his extraordinary find, the Nazis were invading Czechoslovakia. And 6 months later, in September 1939, Britain declared war on Germany. Monte's discovery was totally overshadowed by the outbreak of the Second World War. Luckily, Shoshenq and his tomb of treasures weren't raided by tomb robbers or Nazis, so I can still stand face to face with them here at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo.
So, because of the conditions in the Nile Delta, which are really humid, the mummy of Shoshenq II is in a very fragile state. I mean, basically all that's left inside here is a skeleton. But it's not a bad coffin, is it? This is made of silver and it's in the shape of Horus, that great hawk-headed god who could protect mankind.
Our forgotten pharaoh was buried with these 4 mini silver coffins containing his internal organs. This meant that when Shoshenq II reached the next world, he could be put back together by magic and enter the afterlife complete. There's only one parallel for these mini coffins: the 4 gold ones found with Tutankhamun. With a solid silver coffin and dazzling jewellery, some of which could rival that of Tutankhamun, Shoshenq II was clearly a force to be reckoned with.
Shoshenq II is a worthy candidate for our list because his story has inspired countless adventurers and archaeologists, and his discovery proves that history and archaeology never stand still, but there are always new finds to be had.
The magnificent Great Pyramid of Giza. It's over 4,500 years old and was built as a giant tomb for a pharaoh. But my next mummy, wait for it, actually predates the Great Pyramid by 1,000 years. At number 7 on our countdown, we have an amazing discovery from southern Egypt, with a few surprises in store. But you won't find this extraordinary mummy in Egypt. To track it down, I'm heading to the British Museum in London, home to one of the largest collections of ancient Egyptian mummies in the world.
Let me introduce you to Gebelin Man. He's named after the place he comes from in Egypt, just south of Luxor, and he has the most remarkable life story.
Gebelin Man takes us right back to the very start of Egyptian mummification. And not only that, a recent discovery puts him at the centre of a murder mystery. A mystery that goes back to the Stone Age. Curator Daniel Antoine has been unlocking his extraordinary story.
When people think of mummies, I think they often imagine them wrapped in bandages and lying straight out with their arms crossed over their chests. And he's incredible, but he's very different to that.
He's quite unique. There are very few of these so-called natural mummies. And the reason he's preserved is because he was buried in a shallow pit and the heat of the sun could get to his remains. And he's preserved with his internal organs intact.
The searingly hot conditions in the desert dried out and mummified Gebelin Man's body, making him a natural mummy.
So do we know how old he is?
We actually did some radiocarbon dating using a tiny fragment of his hair. That suggests he's about 5,300 years old, making him one of the oldest mummies in the world.
That's unbelievable. But the state of preservation is incredible. I mean, I can see his hair and a kind of little bit of stubble on his chin.
It just suggests that the heat of the desert must have been really intense because there's no evidence, as far as we can see, of artificial mummification.
Archaeologists believe that Gebelin Man was mummified by accident. And when the ancient Egyptians found natural mummies like his, they were gradually inspired to experiment with mummification on purpose. The process of deliberate mummification finally took off 7 centuries after our Gebelin Man died.
I've got to ask you about his position.
You're right, it's quite unusual, but it's typical of that period.
As the ancient Egyptians experimented with their mummification techniques, they realised that laying the body out straight and wrapping it in linen bandages guaranteed an incredible level of preservation. But Gebelin Man doesn't only take us back to the very start of Egyptian mummification. He also has a sinister story to tell. When Daniel examined Gebelin Man's mummy, he spotted something unusual on his left shoulder blade, so he decided to CT scan the body to find out more. From these scans, Daniel's managed to piece together shocking clues to Gebelin Man's traumatic final moments.
You can see that cut goes into the muscle tissue.
Wow. It's an actual incision of some kind, is it? A blunt or a sharp object has actually gone into his back?
Absolutely, and you can see, if you look at the skeleton, the shoulder blade here, you can see it's completely shattered into fragments compared to the other side.
Yes. That is terrible to see. So what is it? Because that's hit him with real force.
The scan results suggest Gebelin Man was the victim of a violent attack.
Most probably a dagger that's gone straight in a downwards angle through his shoulder blade.
Yeah.
And would have collapsed the lung, maybe cut one of the smaller arteries in the area, and probably He died over 1 or 2 days.
Right. I mean, so it's a really violent death. I mean, any sign that he tried to defend himself, that it was a fight of some kind?
Also, what's interesting, there's no defensive wound, so he appears to have never seen it coming.
Since Gebelin Man was stabbed in the back and didn't try to fight back, it looks like he was ambushed. That is tragic.
And what's also interesting is you can see that his bones are in the process of fusing.
Yes.
So he's actually a young man when he died.
Gebelin Man would only have been about 20 years old when his life ended.
It's only till we CT scanned him that we realized that we had the victim of a crime.
It's the technology of the future giving us back his past. But as amazing as this 5,000-year-old murder investigation is, the story doesn't stop there. Gebelin Man wasn't found alone. Oh my God, they've just come into focus. And coming up, groundbreaking technology lifts the lid on an astonishing discovery.
I mean, that is not a bird.
We've just solved the 5,000-year-old murder mystery of one of the oldest Egyptian mummies in the world, Gebelin Man. But his mummy wasn't alone. A truly remarkable individual, Gebelin woman, was discovered at the same site. So she's also over 5,000 years old. And now modern technology is allowing us to piece together her story.
It is remarkable being this close to her. You can see she's got thick head of hair, these beautiful little fingernails on the end of those very, very fine fingers of hers.
Yeah. What's incredible is she's still revealing secrets. These dark smudges on her arm, which are very hard to see, are actually tattoos.
Tattoos?
Yep.
All I can see is a smudge.
And because they're hard to see, we need to use an infrared camera, really. What the infrared camera does is it highlights carbon, and that they must have used some carbon-based ink to make the tattoo.
To make the tattoo, yeah.
So I take this infrared camera,
Yeah.
and I point it to the right area. If you look at the monitor, they should pop up.
So we're looking at the top of her shoulder.
Yeah, you can see that. So there's 2 lots of tattoos. There's a series of S.
Oh my God, they've just come into focus. That's amazing. That's amazing. So it's four S's.
4 S's on the top of her shoulder.
Yeah.
And then a crooked stave on her, the upper part of her arm.
Oh, yes. This must be very early evidence of tattooing, isn't it?
Well, Gebelin woman is the oldest known tattooed woman in the world. So it's quite special. She is very, very special.
I mean, it's so clear, and presumably this is more what it would have looked like when she was alive. So you've got this curved stave and those S's. What are they for? What do you think that's?
So these are actually symbols of high status, we think.
Yeah. And it's interesting that she's a woman, but she's got this high status mark.
The fact that she has it on her arm perhaps means that she was the yielder of power. And
well, it's quite rare to find strong women in history, so that is pretty cool that she's the oldest tattooed woman, and you think that shows her power and standing.
Gebelin Man and woman might be amongst the oldest mummies in the world, but now these scans reveal that murder, conflict, and female empowerment aren't just modern phenomena. They were there in prehistory too.
These bodies were preserved naturally, but they almost certainly gave ancient Egyptians the idea to mummify deliberately, which has left us with the most incredible historical legacy. But more than that, I think this wonderful woman encourages us to respect and cherish her today.
My next mummy reveals that the ancient Egyptians didn't just mummify humans, but animals too. At number 6 on our countdown, we have the hawk mummy, who's been hiding a shocking secret for 2,000 years. And it's only with a recent discovery that the extraordinary truth has been revealed. And to unlock this mummy story, I'm heading somewhere super special. Ancient Egypt's city of the dead, Saqqara.
For thousands of years, this place was used as a burial ground, and I've just heard that one of the underground catacombs is being opened up, so I'm heading there.
The entrance to this catacomb has been blocked up since 1970 to protect it from tomb raiders, but I've been allowed to witness its opening.
It's just so special to see this, because this is how every tomb and catacomb's been raided and robbed and entered for thousands of years, in the ancient world and the modern. It's amazing. I didn't think I'd ever get to see this. It's amazing.
And Inspector Dr. Ahmed Zakri is here to open up this tomb, sealed for the last 50 years.
Is it easy for you to go like this, or you can,
Yeah, no.
remove?
No, it's fine. I can climb over there. That's
Yeah.
perfect. Is it, might there be any snakes?
Inside? No, I have nothing. No, nothing inside.
Nothing inside?
Don't worry.
Okay.
Don't worry.
I'll hold you to that. No, it's great.
Many of Saqqara's tunnels have never been explored. In the past, people have got lost down here, so I've got to stick close to Hashim.
Wow, it's hot. It gets really hot down here. And it's pretty close. It hasn't been open for years. Oh, look at this. Oh, look at this. Oh, I had no idea that we'd get access to the chambers with so many in. So each one of these pots that you can see, that contains a mummified bird. And apparently there could be millions of them just here, just in this catacomb alone. Is that okay? Can we get down here, Hashim? What have you found? Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. That's so incredible. So the mummies have still got their wrappings on. Yeah.
Every single mummy mattered. Each one was left with the hope that its owner would win favour with the gods.
What? Oh my God. It's a perfect hawk's head. Look at that, you can see the beak and the eyes and this kind of decoration on the mummification bandages. Well, that's incredible. That's that is a find I am not going to forget for the rest of my life.
But there's a reason this tomb has been sealed for so many years. In the 19th century, mummy discoveries in Egypt caused a sensation in Europe. To satisfy mummy mania, souvenir hunters imported and smuggled mummy remains to Britain. Eventually, our hawk mummy found its way to Maidstone Museum. And when curator Samantha Harris decided to scan it, she had a shock in store.
Hi. Are you Sam?
Yes, hi.
Bethany.
Hi, nice to meet you.
That looks to me like a hawk, like a falcon of some kind.
Absolutely. So we have it documented as a mummified hawk, and that is because you've got the very iconic falcon eyes here, and the shape of it is very much bird-like. So with the wider shoulders and the narrower feet, this is very much the kind of hawk shape that you see in mummies.
So lovely, this gold decoration. What clues does the surface give you?
There's detail of what look like feet with gold painted toenails.
Yeah.
And on the base as well, actually what looks like the bottom of sandals.
So it does. So that's
so-
odd.
It's a very weird combination to be seeing in this kind of cartonage as well.
Can you see the mummy itself?
Yes, you can still see the wrapped mummy here, so in good condition.
Beautiful. I mean, that's beautifully done. Can we scan it?
Oh, absolutely.
Chris Price has kindly agreed to scan our hawk mummy with the very latest CT tech to show me what's inside.
I'll just, there we go. Okay, so we're ready to turn on X-rays now.
Yeah.
So I'll just switch those on. And here we've got a live image of what's inside there.
Brilliant.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So if I start to strip off the outer linen, We'll start to see what's inside.
But that looks like a hand. I mean, it's got hands and feet. I mean, that is not a bird.
And this became even clearer as I started to look at the 3D images.
You've got to explain what's happening here, because that looks like that was a human inside there.
Exactly. We're expecting to see very much a bird coming through in the scans, and straight away it became very clear that it was not a hawk. We can see there's crossed hands and arms across the body there.
Yeah.
That's very much a human mummification position.
Absolutely.
We found that it was a mammal. Our initial thoughts were possibly a primate because of the size of it. There were various elements of the body that were sort of looked at to analyse them against animal or human. So the conclusion was come to that it was a human baby.
A baby, look at that. Is it a he or a she, do you know?
Yeah, we've relatively recently found that it's most probably male.
Right. It's so touching, isn't it? So after 2,000 years plus, he's been lying there. Nobody knew his story.
It's hard to believe that this hawk mummy actually concealed a tiny baby. I've never seen anything like this in all my years as a historian. So I've come to the University of Cairo to find out more, to see if my old friend, radiologist Sahar Salem, can help unravel the mystery. An amazing team, including Professor Andrew Nelson from the University of Western Ontario, has been working hard to piece together this story.
The striking thing is when you look at the skull. You can see that this is where the eyes are, and this is the nose, this is the profile, but there's absent of the skull above the eyebrow. So the medical term is anencephaly, or there's no skull. And this is a very well-known deformity that must have happened very early during the development of the fetus.
So is this a condition that you'd still see today?
Yes, absolutely. We still see it today. And this could be related to diet, and this could be totally avoided.
So this poor child's mother could have been lacking in some kind of nutrient?
Yes, there must have been lacking in the food that contains folic acid, the spinach, the vegetables, the grains.
And do you know how old he was, how long he lived?
From the way that the bones developed, he was likely 27 weeks. That means 7 months of pregnancy when he died.
So even though this child has miscarried, they're treating him with respect and with love.
And they want him to be among them in the life after. So they want him as a part of the family. There are very few mummified fetuses that we know. There are about 8. So this guy is a special one.
The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul was created in the womb as the baby developed. So this child could be reunited, body and soul, with his family in the afterlife.
This little mummy tells us so much about the ancient Egyptian worldview, where there was less of a distinction between gods and humans and animals, but it also tells us about pain and loss. This little baby didn't survive birth, but he was given wings so he could fly to the afterlife.
Coming up at number 5 in my countdown, I follow the trail of the mummy of a pharaoh that somebody tried hard to obliterate from history.
Wish me luck.
And I get unique insight into the individuals still lying in their wraps.
That's so impressive. We're beginning to see the man inside.
I'm counting down our top 10 Egyptian mummies. For number 5, we're at Karnak, the vast temple complex where pharaohs celebrated their achievements, but also where there's a conundrum.
Now, what you should be looking at here is the image of my next mummy. But
instead of a great pharaoh, you've just got this ghostly presence. I mean, someone has gone to a huge amount of effort to hack out the face and body that was once on these walls. And there's a reason for that. My next choice is so controversial. Ancient Egypt wanted to wipe their memory from the face of the earth.
Number 5 in our list was an enlightened ruler, a skilled negotiator, a winning diplomat, and crucially, a woman in a man's world.
This is one of my all-time heroines of history, Hatshepsut.
I'm incredibly lucky to be close to this mummy, only identified as Hatshepsut in 2007. And the tale behind her discovery is worthy of Agatha Christie. The first clues are found here, in one of ancient Egypt's most iconic buildings.
This is Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, built so that priests could worship her during her life in preparation for her death. And even by ancient Egyptian standards, it is vast.
Hatshepsut is a rare female pharaoh, and the truth is, she wasn't even officially in line for the throne. When her husband, Tutmosis II, died, his direct heir was her stepson, Tutmosis III. He was too young to rule, so Hatshepsut was put in charge until he came of age. But then, Hatshepsut pronounced herself pharaoh instead and reigned for over 15 years.
So this is one of my very favourite images in the temple. It is Hatshepsut, but looking like a man. So she's got this stick-on beard, which most pharaohs would actually have used, so that's not unusual. But look at how she's dressed, and I'm sure she's doing this on purpose. I'm sure that this is Hatshepsut saying, I am your female king, and I can do the job of any man.
But Hatshepsut ruled her way.
And she often asked for the people's blessing in all that she did, which was really unusual for the time. So in many ways, she was styling herself a kind of Bronze Age people's princess.
She also brought wealth, trade, and stability to Egypt. So why try to erase her from history? Out here in the Valley of the Kings, her mummy seemed to vanish too. Some of her belongings were found, but her body was nowhere to be seen. Then in 1903, archaeologists discovered a tomb which was a real enigma.
Okay, shukran. So I was warned that this tomb was difficult to get into. Wish me luck. This doesn't look like a royal tomb, and there are no decorations here. So what lay inside the chamber was a complete mystery. Wow, it's great to get down here because I've read a lot about this place, but I've never made it in. And when it was first discovered, frankly, what was in here was a bit odd. So there were mummified geese and a coffin with the name of Hatshepsut's wet nurse on, and then a single female mummy just propped up against the bare rock.
Hatshepsut's wet nurse's mummy was removed and taken to Cairo. But the unidentified female mummy was left alone for 100 years until archaeologists came to fetch her in 2006. Back in Cairo, the female mummy was scanned in the hope of revealing her secrets. My colleague, Egyptologist Salima Ikram, has the details.
Oh, how are you? How are you? I'm so glad you made it.
I know. There's an intriguing thing about her identification, isn't there? That there's something about a missing tooth.
Oh, the story of how she was identified is amazing. When they were being scanned, they found that there was a molar missing. You know, fine, whatever, that's sort of normal. But there's a box that was found, and that box has...
It's this one.
That's the very box.
Yeah.
And it's inscribed with the name of Hatshepsut. Now, it had a package in it which they thought was probably her liver. And when they scanned it, they found embedded in the resin a molar, broken off. And they think, because when they did the scan, that one of the roots is still here and the root is broken off, and they thought that they matched. And as a result, they thought, must be Hatshepsut.
So, just to get the story straight, when Hatshepsut was mummified, it seems that her liver and tooth were put in a personalised box. The box became separated from the mummy. Now, this mummy is also missing a tooth. Reuniting the two has led us to the remains of a once great queen. I mean, it's really interesting, this tooth. Has that randomly ended up in that box, or do you think it sort of dropped out during the mummification process? Or?
A lot of things get loose when you're being dried with natron, and so maybe she had just lost the tooth or something. Someone noticed it because it was cracked or broken, and then during the course of mummification it fell out, and they thought, oh bloody hell, we've already wrapped up her face, and so they might have stuffed it into that, and so, you know, 4,000 years later or something, here we are trying to put it together.
And also in the process of her mummification, Hatshepsut appears to have been given what may very well be the world's first tummy tuck.
You know, when you see her in her relief, she looks rather slender and very elegant. This lady is quite plump.
She doesn't look plump.
Well, it's what they did is when they use the natron, what it does is it desiccates, but it also defats, so it sucks it all out, which is great for your diet. And then all the loose flesh, after it's been desiccated, was taken, stretched out, and then tucked underneath, and then kept in place with resin.
So they're literally pinning back the kind of excess flesh. Gosh.
And so she looks a bit more as she did in her youth.
Hatshepsut is one of the most remarkable women in the story of the world. She should be a household name, shouldn't she?
Absolutely. I mean, how often do you get a female pharaoh ruling Egypt, sending people to all kinds of places on expeditions and creating some of the world's most exquisite monuments?
Incredible. Oh, I wish she could talk. I wish she could tell us, you know, why she ended up being so... What a woman. What a woman. Well, kudos and respect to her.
Absolutely.
And who tried to obliterate her from history? Well, almost certainly her jealous stepson, Tutmosis III, although it now looks like he was foiled in his mission. The mummy of Hatshepsut deserves to be celebrated, not just because it involves an incredible detective story, but more importantly, because it helps us understand one of the greatest and most powerful women of all time. In the 19th century, explorers were uncovering and buying mummies from across Egypt. Mummies became big business. Many ended up in private collections and in museums across the world. The British Museum in London is now home to no fewer than 140 Egyptian mummies. In a corner of the museum's storeroom hides my next mummy, number 4 on my countdown. And this mummy isn't a mighty pharaoh, but more a man of the street. The reason he makes it onto my list is because he shows us just how much we can learn about the ancient Egyptians from investigating a body that's close on 3,000 years old. Curator John Taylor's on hand to show what we can piece together, starting from the outside.
And this is what I wanted to show you.
So beautiful. Look at those colours, they're amazing.
It's incredible, yes.
But it's not a coffin that we're looking at, is it?
We would call this a cartonnage case. It's a kind of papier-mâché shell that fits around the mummy. It's made from layers of linen.
Mm-hmm. And his mummy is still inside here.
Yes, completely sealed up inside.
And do we know from this, from the decoration, who it is?
We do, because his name is inscribed above this figure here, Paddy Amenet. And this figure represents him.
Mm-hmm. Is this a kind of portrait of him?
This is how he wants to look in the next life. Young, perfect, no kinds of illness, no physical defect.
Plump as well.
A little bit plump.
Well fed. Yeah. I've noticed there seems to be a sort of slightly rubbish bit tacked on at the end. What's going on with that?
Yes, looks as though the people who were making the cartonnage didn't make it quite long enough.
Right.
So when it came to putting him inside, his feet were sticking out at the end. And all they could do was just quickly cover up his feet with a bit of extra linen.
Great. But do we get any other clues to his life from this?
We know that he was the chief doorkeeper of the Temple of Re at Karnak. That's written in the inscriptions just here.
Yeah.
He's a kind of security guard because the temple contains lots of valuable objects. He's also there to watch who comes through the doors.
So the first thing we learn is that Paddy Amenet was a kind of temple bouncer. And this is where he once worked. The staggering temple of Amun in Karnak, just outside Luxor.
A number of areas in the temple were reserved exclusively for the elite and elite priests. So there were hundreds of doormen here. Paddy Amenet's job was to make it very clear where was off limits. So, as you can imagine, doormen were often rather unpopular. There are these brilliant depictions from the time of them falling asleep on the job and being described as corrupt and lazy.
It was a role that was passed down from father to son, so Paddy Amenet was in a privileged position. Probably good food, great pay and decent hours. But the job also came with another curious responsibility. Paddy Amenet also acted as the local barber at the temple.
Egyptian priests were completely shaved from head to toe, so that would have meant there'd have been a lot of rummaging around in men's underarms and private parts.
I want to see what else we can learn about Paddy Amenet from his mummy, but there's a challenge. For the last 200 years, the British Museum hasn't unwrapped any of their mummies out of respect and fear of damage. Now, the very latest 3D technology allows us to peer beneath the bandages without touching a hair on these mummies' heads. A pioneering team, led by Daniel Antoine, is giving our ancient Egyptian bouncer cum barber a 21st century post-mortem.
That's what's extraordinary about CT scanning, is that you can virtually remove layer by layer and reveal their remains for the first time since they were embalmed. And here you can see Paddy Amenet's face.
I mean, but that's so impressive. So you haven't touched his cartonnage, you haven't touched the linen wrappings. But look at, look at this. We're beginning to see the man inside. So what does it tell you about how he was embalmed and mummified?
So his brain was removed through his nose, minimal damage, removing quite a three-dimensional organ through a very small aperture.
Yeah.
But also they've added packing in his mouth, and then they've reconstructed the nose and added some lips so that his facial features are preserved and recognizable in the afterlife.
What about him as a person and his lifestyle? Could you tell any of that from the scan?
We discovered that he had terrible dental health. If I virtually remove all the soft tissue, and this is what you have here, is you've got these lesions, these periapical lesions, and here you can see the bone is really moved away from the molar. And these are probably abscesses or cysts, and he might have died from these infections. He might have died for two complications, either because he had a lot of pus going down his mouth.
Pus?
Yes.
Nice.
And the throat closes up, or if the infection enters the bloodstream, you die from septicemia.
God. Do you think that's anything to do with the
the fact that he's working in a temple, so he'd have had access to kind of pretty rich foods, you know, because it's the sort of centre of activity and where a lot of the treasures and wealth is kept.
Absolutely, you would have had a very rich diet, and that appears to have had other consequences. If we look at some of the arteries in the leg, so here you've got the femoral artery, you can see that inside the femoral artery you've got this large plaque deposit. It's the same density as bone, it's calcified. And this is basically hardened fat, hardened cholesterol. And he suffered from cardiovascular disease, basically. And he would have been at high risk of a heart attack or a stroke.
Wow, wow.
And what we think of this as a modern disease, but actually the more mummies we study, the more we realize it was very common in ancient Egypt in these mummified individuals.
But the scans also revealed something rather unexpected.
You can see these two giant poles that were inserted to hold and reattach his head. You can see them highlighted in green here.
Yeah.
There were no signs of trauma in the neck, so it's likely that as the body dried, because the skull is very heavy, the head detached, and they had to reattach it as part of the embalming process.
Wow. I mean, that is not good practice, is it?
No, absolutely not. But the embalmers still achieve a lot of what Paddy Amenet would have wanted.
No, incredible. What he wanted was immortality, and 2,700 years on, we're looking at him face to face.
Exactly.
Paddy Amenet is still here with us. And it's amazing, isn't it, how much we can learn about him and his life story without disturbing his body. But I'll tell you what I really love about this mummy. He reminds us that mummification wasn't just for pharaohs and their queens, but for many ancient Egyptians, even the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a bouncer. Coming up, I continue my countdown of top 10 Egyptian mummies with a terrible tale of a pharaoh's family at war. This shows his enemies' hands and penises having been cut off. I'm back in Cairo to introduce you to a mummy who's been hiding a gruesome secret for thousands of years. At number 3 on my countdown, it's Ramesses III, a man who had enemies everywhere. So this is the mummy of Ramesses III. And on the face of it, he looks really typical, but you've got to have a look at this bandage wrapped around his neck, which is really, really unusual. When this mummy was scanned, it was discovered that he has a massive gash on his neck. So it seems as though Ramesses III has had his throat slit. The story behind Ramesses' horrendous death is a royal scandal worthy of Game of Thrones. Let me take you to a possible crime scene. On the west bank of the Nile, a temple where mummies were prepared, and perhaps a fatal plot was prepared too. This is the mortuary temple of Ramesses III, built so that ordinary people could worship him during his lifetime. As well as being a temple, there was a palace here, so we can learn not just about Ramses' death, but the events that led up to it. This palace would have been a beating heart of royal power, possibly for women as well as men. Now, in many of the royal palaces, there was a harem where all the royal women of real influence lived. And we're told that in the harem of Ramesses III, a plot was hatched to kill the king. Archaeologist Kimberly Watt has been studying what really went down with Ramesses III over 3,000 years ago. When we use the word harem in relation to Egypt, what does that actually mean? What does an ancient Egyptian harem look like?
It's a royal household dedicated to royal women.
We're talking about substantial numbers here.
Yes.
Hundreds?
Yes, definitely more than that.
And if you've got that many royal women in a tight space together, you can imagine them
plotting and planning. There really could have been this harem conspiracy. There could have been a plot to kill the king.
Yes, definitely. We have the evidence for that. We have a papyrus actually records it in a very detailed manner. There was a plot to overthrow, kill the king during Ramses III's reign.
Written not in hieroglyphs, but in an Egyptian script that any literate Egyptian could read, it's an extraordinary record of the trial of the conspirators in a plot hatched by a woman called Tai.
Now, Tai was a secondary wife of Ramesses III, and she was clearly furious with him. And we know this because of this amazing bit of evidence that survived over 3,000 years. And it tells us that a plot was hatched to kill the king and put Tai's son, Prince Pentawere, on the throne instead. Now, frustratingly, the papyrus doesn't actually tell us the outcome of the trial, but I can tell you that conspirators in a court intrigue like this would be encouraged to commit suicide and would almost certainly be horribly mutilated before they died.
And when I say horribly mutilated, I mean it.
This shows his enemies' hands and penises having been cut off.
Ramesses III's slit throat may be proof that Queen Tai's plot to assassinate him succeeded. And further research has revealed a curious thing. Ramesses' big toe appears to have been hacked off, most probably at the same time that his throat was cut. During his mummification, a loyal subject made him a new toe out of linen and resin to ensure the king could walk proud in his afterlife.
The story of Ramses III tells us of the power and influence of the harem in ancient Egyptian politics, but it also reminds us that even the greatest aren't immune to the twists and turns of fate.
And that Egyptian women were also players in ancient politics, not just the men. Our next mummy is one of Egypt's most controversial rulers.
This is an extraordinary man with a problem. The issue with this notorious pharaoh is that physically there's not much of him left. He was a pioneer and an out-and-out rebel, and that is one of the reasons there's a mystery that surrounds his mummy. And it's this dramatic life story that makes him our next choice.
At number 2 on our countdown, it's the pharaoh Akhenaten. For years, the fate of his mummy lay shrouded in mystery. And when a tomb was discovered in 1907, the plot only thickened.
I'm really lucky to get access to this tomb because we've actually got to break the seal in order to get in, and that's amazing for me because the first reports of this being excavated at the beginning of the 20th century talks about having to break one of the original seals to enter. شكرا شكرا ممكن
What was discovered here just didn't add up. Grave goods scattered across the floor and a dumped, beaten-up coffin, apparently containing the decomposed body of Akhenaten himself.
He wasn't being treated like a royal mummy.
To understand why and what happened to this once great pharaoh, I'm going right back to the beginning of his story.
To follow Akhenaten's trail, I'm heading out deep into the desert.
I'm I'm looking for clues to help unlock the puzzle of Akhenaten's mummy. Our first stop is this remote tomb deep in the Egyptian desert.
So this is actually the tomb of the high priest. Here, with his face scratched out, is Akhenaten driving a beautiful chariot.
But why was his face scratched out? Well, 5 years into his reign, Akhenaten makes a series of extraordinary decisions. First, the pharaoh announces that Egyptians should stop worshipping their traditional gods.
He declared all Egyptians should now worship one god alone, the great sun god, Aten.
Akhenaten does everything in his power to ban the practice of the old religion. As the living incarnation of the great sun god, everyone now had to worship the uber-pharaoh Akhenaten. And if that wasn't enough,
he decides to move his entire court and community to the desert.
the pharaoh's court had once been at luxurious Luxor, a beautiful site on the banks of the life-giving Nile. But his brand new city, Amarna, 200 miles away, would have to be built entirely from scratch in the most punishing environment. Archaeologist Anna Stevens and her team have made a shocking discovery. They've given me access to their remarkable finds, and I'm hoping to find more clues that'll help me understand Akhenaten's controversial life story.
What is it exactly you're digging here?
Oh, it's an ancient cemetery. So a cemetery for like the ordinary people.
Okay. Yeah, because you can see the human remains everywhere. That's really. What do you think these ones are?
You can see bits of ribs popping up, and if you actually look very closely,
you can just see some teeth popping out of the sand. So this is part of a jaw, or the lower part of the skull.
God, you can. Mm-hmm. And how many are there here?
Probably in this one cemetery, there's something like 4,000 to 5,000 people buried here. Mm-hmm. It's enormous.
That's enormous.
Yep. So it's not just a few hundred people.
What can you tell so far from the human remains here?
What we find from the study of the skeletons is that they were undertaking very heavy, very hard labour.
Yes.
So there's lots of signs of degenerative joint disease, so arthritis on their skeletons. In a way, in patterns that suggest they were doing things like heavy lifting, especially.
Right.
And various other signs generally of difficult lives, difficult work conditions.
Yes.
And what we think is that this is probably a cemetery of labourers. Mm-hmm. And they were very young. So most of the people buried here, they're aged between 7 and 24 years of age.
No. So it's child labourers?
Yeah, exactly.
So do you think there's a possibility they're being drafted in or brought in to try to help build this city in a hurry?
So it does seem likely that they're actually involved in building the city for the king.
Right.
Amarna was built using child labour. The skeleton of this 12-year-old, only just discovered, bears witness to the huge loads they were carrying. Limestone slabs, up to 70 kilos, caused shocking injuries. This skeleton reveals crushed neck vertebrae, fused spinal bones, and skull deformities.
You see, this is the truth. So you get the official version of history when what's being described as this kind of brilliant, glittering experiment.
Yeah.
And then, this is the harsh reality of what's going on.
The people's history.
Yeah. The great tragedy is that all that pain and suffering was pointless.
Within just 20 years, the Egyptians had turned back to their old beliefs and decided to abandon Akhenaten's crazy new city.
Akhenaten became one of the most hated pharaohs of all time. His successors destroyed statues and struck him from the list of kings. His own son, the world-famous Tutankhamun, immediately reversed his father's radical ideas and returned the royal court to Luxor. Akhenaten's coffin and his mummy were left abandoned.
The story goes that priests scratched out his face so that he wouldn't be recognised in the afterlife by the gods. I have to say, I think that is actually a bit fanciful, but what is certain is that after his death, Akhenaten was unmourned and unloved. Amarna was conceived as a kind of utopian experiment, but for many, it ended up a living hell. So Akhenaten reminds us to know when to stop.
Next, we reveal the neglected story of our #1 mummy in my countdown of top 10 Egyptian mummies.
Here he is. He hasn't been treated so well across the years.
It's been an epic journey as we count down our top 10 Egyptian mummies. At number 10, we met Ramses the Great, the man who created one of the world's first peace treaties. At number 9, Seti I revealed that ancient Egyptians had skills in cosmetic surgery. At number 8, we found Shoshenq II, the lost pharaoh of Tanis. And at number 7, we got under the skin of some of the oldest mummies in the world, Gebelin man and woman. At number 6, a baby disguised as a bird. And my heroine, Hatshepsut, was number 5, the woman who properly rocked in a man's world. At number 4, Paddy Amenet, the bouncer, was digitally unwrapped. At number 3, it was Ramses III and the revenge of the royal harem. And at number 2 was the religious radical Akhenaten, who broke his people's backs building his dream city. Now, it's time to reveal number 1 in our top 10 countdown of astonishing Egyptian mummies. The final mummy in our top 10 is the most famous pharaoh in the world. His solid gold death mask and over 5,000 of the treasures buried with him have given us an incredible insight into the lives of the ancient Egyptians and the world of the teenage king, Tutankhamun. We've all heard of Tutankhamun, not because he was a great pharaoh in life, but because his almost intact tomb treasures were found 3,300 years after his death. But dazzled by all this gold, the mummy of the teenage king himself is often overlooked. So I want you to meet him in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings.
Here he is, the mummy of Tutankhamun. And when you come up close to him, I think you realise that he is just a vulnerable, fragile teenager. Originally, you could have seen his lovely eyelashes and the fact that he had pierced ears and his arms were very peacefully folded across his chest. But he hasn't been treated so well across the years.
It was November 1922 when British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb. Incredible treasures were captured on camera. Breaking through into Tutankhamun's burial chamber, Carter discovered, inside a stone sarcophagus, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a Russian doll. 3 coffins, each smaller than the last. The first, gold-plated wood. The second, the same, decorated with semi-precious stones. But the third, the smallest coffin, is made of solid gold. Inside lay the mummy of Tutankhamun, his face covered by the now famous golden death mask. Eager to see inside, Carter unwrapped Tutankhamun's mummy, leaving his tiny body exposed. He then had to ease Tutankhamun's body out of the coffin, with difficulty using heated knives. The young pharaoh's body was then left in this outer wooden coffin. Tutankhamun lay there for 40 years. When he was removed for examination, an awful truth was revealed. Over time, Tut's hands had come off, his legs were detached from his pelvis, and when the famous death mask was removed, his neck was severed. So now, instead of an intact royal mummy, all we have is this fragile body with tiny remnants of his mummification bandages clinging to his toes. I'm glad to say that now, at last, we treat mummies, including Tut's remains, with a great deal more reverence and expertise. And the Egyptian authorities have launched a multi-million-pound programme to restore and preserve Tut's legacy for future generations.
The lid's been put back on Tutankhamun's sarcophagus for the first time in years, but I've been promised I can have a special look at what was hidden inside.
I've been granted a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity behind the scenes at the Grand Egyptian Museum. The labs here have dedicated teams of specialists carrying out incredibly delicate work to restore priceless treasures. A high-tech operation to save one of Tutankhamun's most prized pieces, the final resting place of his mummy.
I know this place seems a bit austere, but frankly, I think it is one of the most exciting places on Earth because this is where Tutankhamun's treasures are being lovingly cared for and restored. And I am genuinely very privileged to get access here.
Hey, hello, to see
You are welcome at Grand Egyptian Museum.
Dr. Isa Zidane is in charge of the restoration team.
Shukran.
This is Saudi lab.
Yes, I'm blown away. This is incredible because this is the outer casket of Tutankhamun's burial.
Yes.
So, remember the Russian doll coffins that Tut was buried in? This is the actual gold-plated wooden outer coffin where Tutankhamun's mummy was left for 40 years.
And this is the first time to go outside the tomb.
Well, it's the first time that it's come out since its discovery. It's also the first time it's come out in over 3,000 years.
Yes,
when
you are right.
Tut was buried here. It's just, honestly, Doctor, I never thought I'd get to stand. I've seen this.
You are very, very lucky, and this is a good chance for you. You will not take like this chance again. Yes, no one saw these coffins from inside. This is the first time for you and for most of the people to see the coffins from inside. Because it was in the tomb covered by the lid.
By the lid?
By the lid, yes. Amazing.
Completely. And amazing for you as well.
Yes, for me, very, very amazing.
Yeah. But it looks quite damaged to me.
Yes, after we lifted the coffins from the stone coffin, we have a big shock about the condition of this coffin.
Really?
Very, very bad conditions.
You can see it suffered.
Many gilded plasters, many gilded layer fell down.
Yes.
And also, as you see here, the conditions not so good. So our colleagues here started to study it and fix it.
Yes. Well, you're respecting him now as he was respected when he was first buried.
Yes, yes.
The restoration work is extraordinary. It's worth remembering that, just like Tut's mummy, this coffin is over 3,300 years old.
So this is the lid of the coffin. It's kind of the most famous bit. It's the bit that you could see in the tomb. And the workmanship on it is totally remarkable. So you can see every single detail on the feathers. And this is Tutankhamun being represented as the god Osiris, the mighty god of the underworld. It's massive. It's over 7 foot long. And I've met Ahmed before. Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Ahmed's one of the restorers here. When you're doing this restoration work,
Yeah.
does it make you feel even more impressed by the Egyptians?
Of course. We impressed with the ancient Egyptian manufacturers, and also with a lot of techniques that used by the ancient Egyptian. For example, here he used some inlays and some pigments.
The tomb also contained another totally unexpected find. One that gives us a moving insight into what mattered to this young pharaoh.
Howard Carter found 2 coffins, and inside the 2 coffins, they found 2 feet.
These 2 babies died in the womb at around 25 and 37 weeks old. Gosh, it's so poignant to see them. They're so perfect, aren't they? You can see their fingers on their hands and, you know, the shape of their legs. Amazing.
Yeah.
And do we have any more information of who they are?
Some opinions say this is 2 daughters of King Tut, doesn't complete, and put it in the tomb.
So they were born prematurely, or
yes, maybe
or stillborn, because that's an important part of his story, that he died when he was just a teenager,
yes,
and he died without any heirs.
Yes.
So it would kind of change history a bit if we think these could be his daughters. These poor little girls, isn't it amazing to think that we're still investigating their story over 3,000 years after they died?
Stillborn, these 2 tiny baby girls were still lovingly preserved, showing us that for the ancient Egyptians, mummification was the ultimate act of reverence. An approach that, thankfully, is now being matched by their careful preservation and the dignity of their treatment today.
I wonder if he feels he's getting the right kind of immortality thanks to being a celebrity. I mean, certainly we are saying the name of Tutankhamun again and again and again. And the incredible survival of this mummy has given us an enduring fascination with ancient Egypt and with mummification in particular.
In our top 10, we've spanned 4,000 years of Egyptian history. From a couple mummified by nothing more than the hot sands of Egypt, to mighty pharaohs buried in the grandeur of the Valley of the Kings. We've seen cutting-edge research shining a new light on the ancient dead. And remembered that mummies are the bodies of real people who deserve to be honoured. And that's why we should treasure Tutankhamun, my #1 Egyptian mummy.
Mummification is a remarkable, frankly quite miraculous process that allows us to come face to face with women and men from ancient Egypt and to understand their stories, their hopes and their fears. It also allows us to be eternally fascinated by them. And in fact, to do what mummification was originally intended to do, to remember their names with respect and awe across thousands of years.
It was the border that signalled the end of the Roman Empire on these shores. Robson Green travels the length of Hadrian's Wall, a brand new series starting next Thursday at 9. Using computer-generated imagery, what does the ocean reveal about missing Malaysia Airlines Flight 370? Plane wreck, draining the ocean. That's next.